Okay friends, to get started on this job, the first thing that we need to talk about is safety. You want hand protection and eye protection at all times. With that said, safely raise and support your vehicle so you have your front wheel off the ground. We're going to remove this center cover and then we're going to remove the lug nuts as well. Get your wheel off of here. Okay, now that the wheel's off, we have a nice clear view of our inner tie rod end. We need to loosen this jam nut right here. I like to use a nice big pair of pliers. Give that a little turn, grab it, there we are. Make sure it's broken free. Now we're going to remove our outer tie rod end nut. To remove your outer tie rod end, it's best to hit right along the knuckle. If for some reason that isn't working and you don't have a threaded area along the top of your tie rod, you could carefully try to bonk along the top as well. Now we're going to unscrew our outer tie rod end from the inner. As you do this, turning counterclockwise, you want to count the amount of turns. 1, 2, and so on. Next, we're going to fully remove our jam nut here. Sometimes they'll be stuck on there. If that's the case, hold your inner tie rod end with some pliers and then remove the nut. Now we need to remove our bellows boot right here. To do that, you need to remove your outer clamp right here, and then closer to the rack you're going to find another clamp. Remove them both and get the boot off. To do this inner clamp, I like to use a nice pry bar like this and a hammer, and if you come right along this area you're going to see a metal piece that comes up. That's actually the clamp. We want to break that right off. It's a single time use. Grab our bellows boot, give it a twist, and pull it off the inner tie rod end in the rack. Check your bellows boot, make sure it is not torn in any way. This one looks great. We'll reuse it. Now it's time to take the inner tie rod end off of the rack. To do that, you can use several things. They have an inner tie rod end tool that'll slide over this, and it'll have a little hooky-doo that'll grab onto that. Not everybody has access to that, so I like to use some nice long pliers. You can pretty much find these anywhere. Grab right onto it. And then I'm going to turn it counterclockwise to break it free. Now we'll just unscrew it completely. There we are, friends. Now it's going to be time to install our brand new tie rod end. I always like to use a tiny bit of thread locker. With that said, at this point I'm just going to go ahead and put it in here. I'll screw it in until it bottoms out, and then we'll snug it up. Now that we have this bottomed out, it's going to be time to snug it up. I'm going to go back to using these nice long pliers. When I grab onto this, I'm just going to give it a nice little tweak to make sure it's locked down. I don't want to continue twisting so I don't damage the rack though, so pay special attention to that. That's nice and tight. Let's go ahead and get this jam nut off of here. Now it's going to be time to get our bellows boot back on here. When we remove the inside clamp, you probably broke it. If that's the case, go ahead and get yourself a wire tie. I like to just start it and then I'll slide it right over like this. I'm not going to tighten it down yet. Next we're going to put the bellows boot on the power steering rack and we're going to push as far as it can go so it's completely bottomed out. Then we'll go ahead and snug it up. Put that on there. Give it a nice twist. Make sure it's completely situated. That looks great. At this point, I usually like to use some long nose pliers. It's something that's easy to grip onto and you can give it a twist. And then of course we'll trim off whatever's left. There we are. Trim this. Next, I always like to take the bellows boot and I'll just try to push it in a little bit. If you were to look at the inner tie rod end, you're going to see there's these grooves. Just put a tiny bit of grease or whatever type of lubricant you might have just along that area. That's right where this boot has to ride. The reason for that is because when you go to get an alignment, you don't want the boot being stuck on the inner tie rod end and then twisting as the alignment professional is trying to do his job. That up there. That feels great. Now we're going to put our clamp back on there. Let's take our clamp, put it right on our pliers here, get it ready. I'm going to go over the inner tie rod end and then of course over the boot. Next, we're just going to put a little bit of copper never seize on our threads. That's going to help prevent things from seizing up. Take your nice new jam nut. We'll put it right on here. Something to mention, anytime you're doing your inner tie rod end, it's always a good idea to replace your outer tie rod end, especially if it looks as though they're in the same condition. Ours looks really great, so I'm just going to go ahead and reinstall it. I'm going to count as I go in. There's 1, 2, 3, and so on. Okay, so now I just finished up with the exact same amount of turns as when I took it off. Let's go ahead and bring this jam nut down close to the outer tie rod end. Now it's time to get our outer tie rod end into the knuckle. Let's see if I can just turn it a little bit. Slide it in here. There we are. Take our nut. If it has a lock, make sure the lock is facing up, of course. Now we're going to snug it down, and then we're going to torque it to 111 foot-pounds. Now we're just going to make sure our jam nut's nice and snug. Awesome. Now it's time to get our wheel back up on here. We'll start on all of our lug nuts, bottom them out, and then we're going to torque them to 150 foot-pounds. Next, you need to get your vehicle so the tire is just barely on the ground so it can't spin. We're going to torque the lug nuts, like I said, to 150 foot-pounds in a star pattern. Once you've torqued it, make sure you put back on your center cover, of course. Okay, friends, anytime you do any type of front end work on your vehicle, it's always super important to make sure you get your vehicle down to a reputable alignment shop. They're going to take care of you and make sure you're going straight on down the road. Be safe out there.